historic day. Senator Bernie Sanders has explicitly enthusiastically endorsed Secretary of State Hillary Clinton for President of the United States, made a strong case both for her candidacy and against Donald Trump's, and talked about the various issues that he has worked so hard for, that so many of us have worked so hard for, and that both Secretary Clinton and now increasingly the entire Democratic Party are committing themselves to. And for those, we've talked about the over the last couple of weeks about the Democratic platform and all the debates and the fights and whatnot that have been going on in the platform. And then there are people who say, well, the platform's not a binding commitment. It's no big deal. It turns out it is a big deal. And the reason it is a big deal, at least this year. I mean, there have been a lot of past years where nobody even bothered to read the platform. But this year it's clearly a big deal because Senator Sanders has made it one. He and his supporters have been passionately fighting for, showing up, participating, and the consequence of that is, in my opinion, a more united Democratic Party and a far more progressive Hillary Clinton candidacy than we would have seen had Bernie Sanders not been in the race. And this, I believe, is the very best thing for the Hillary Clinton campaign. It's the very best thing for the Democratic Party. And most importantly, I think it's the very best thing for the United States and for the world. So let's get into some of these issues that Bernie talked about in his endorsement of Hillary Clinton. Here he is speaking about one of the principal duties defined by the Constitution of a president, the Senate, which is nominating a Supreme Court justice. The Senate, of course, in this case, the Republican Senate refusing to do its job with Merrick Garland, President Obama's nominee. But anyhow, here's Bernie talking about this.
This election is about which candidate will nominate Supreme Court justices who are
Yeah, you think? I mean, this is, can you imagine Trump's Supreme Court justice? Oh, God.
Who will nominate Supreme Court justices who are prepared to overturn the disastrous Citizens United decision a decision which is allowing billionaires to buy elections and is undermining our democracy.
And it really is.
This election is about who will appoint new justices on the Supreme Court who will defend a woman's right to choose.
It's got a huge applause line. And I mean, Trump is now saying, oh, yeah, he's going to appoint anti-abortion the justices, or anti-choice
who will
justices.
Defend the rights of the LGBT community,
which Trump wants to roll back.
Who will defend workers' rights,
Trump
the
trying
needs
to bust
of
his
minorities and immigrants, and the government's ability to protect our environment.
Yeah, there you go. And and Bernie makes the point. If you don't think this election is important, just consider the Supreme Court and consider the kind of people that Donald Trump would nominate and what that would do for civil liberties, what that would do for the rights of minorities, what that would do for equal rights in the future of our country. He says. He also talks about universal health care, number 2.
This campaign is about moving the United States toward universal health care.
There you go.
And reducing the number of people in our country who are uninsured or underinsured.
And then he speaks about Hillary Clinton wants to see that all Americans.
Hillary Clinton wants to see that all Americans have the right to choose a public option in their health care exchange, which will lower the cost of health care for millions.
That public option, of course,
she
is the
also
first
believes
single
that
payer.
anyone 55 years or older should be able to opt in to Medicare,
which would be a big deal.
And she wants to see millions more Americans gain access to primary health care, dental care, mental health counseling, and low-cost prescription drugs. a major and dramatic expansion of community health centers throughout this country.
Okay, so let me unpack that a little bit. He talks about this major expansion of community health centers across this country. Bernie Sanders single-handedly, I mean, he ended up with allies, but when Obamacare was being debated, he was on the committee in the Senate that put together the Affordable Care Act. Bernie Sanders helped write the Affordable Care Act. And part of his price for participation, the cost of his vote for the Affordable Care Act, was 10,000 community health care centers across the United States. One of my kids works at one of those health care centers. I mean, they're amazingly, we visited it. They're serving largely the homeless community in Oregon, in Portland, Oregon. And it's astonishing. And this has not been, like a big part of the whole Democratic, well, actually, I guess it is. It's part of the Affordable Care Act now. But Bernie has been focusing on this like a laser for decades. And so he's got that. The second thing, he said Hillary Clinton believes that anyone 55 or older should be able to opt into Medicare. Here's why that's a big deal. Robert Ball was the author of Medicare. He was a long-time health policy guy. I'm sorry, I don't remember his whole bio. I wrote about him at some length in my book, Rebooting the American Dream. And he worked with Lyndon Johnson to put together Medicare. And when they put together Medicare, he wrote to friends of his, and these letters are now, some of these letters are now public. And in fact, I published one of them, or part of one of them, in my book, Rebooting the American Dream, where he said, the president, Lyndon Johnson, and I, and the people working with us, and I'm paraphrasing from memory here now, so you can look it up in my book, which you can read free online, by the way, over at truthout.org. But in any case, Robert Ball, the guy who wrote the Medicare law, the father of Medicare, along with Lyndon Johnson, wrote that it was their plan to roll out Medicare for people 65 and older because the health insurance companies really didn't want to be paying for those people anyway, and this was the way to get it into law. And then to begin lowering the age of eligibility regularly until it reached zero. In other words, Medicare was the beginning of a national single-payer health care program. That was the intention of Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s. And I think it was 65 or 6 that Medicare passed. Harry Truman was the first person to get a Medicare card, if I'm remembering correctly. And he was still alive back then. And this is fulfilling that vision. So, I mean, see, there's a lot of stuff in here that just, it's easy to just think these are like applause lines. There's history behind a lot of these things. And in some cases, very, very consequential history. Clip number 3 here. Bernie talks about how Hillary Clinton and he are in agreement about the problems with Medicare Part D, the program that was passed during the Bush administration, largely by Republicans, actually. And the Democratic opposition was because it required the government, when Medicare pays for drugs, to pay full retail price, even though it's paying for millions and millions of pills, and which is stupid for everybody except the banksters who run, or what the hell, they're banksters. the hustlers who run some of the pharmaceutical companies. And so anyhow, here's Bernie talking about that.
She and I are in agreement that Medicare must negotiate drug prices with the pharmaceutical industry. And that we must expand the use of generic medicine. Drug companies should not be making billions in profit while 1 out of 5 Americans are unable to afford the medicine they need.
And a classic Bernie line.
The greed of the drug companies must end.
The greed of the drug companies must end. I mean, reading through this, you can find a transcript, by the way, of his speech over at BernieSanders.com. And there are parts that were written by both campaigns. There were parts that were written by speechwriters, but there's obviously some parts in here that were written by Bernie himself. And that particular line, the greed of the drug companies must end, is remarkable. I mean, it's just remarkable. So I've got some more clips I want to play for you of Bernie endorsing Hillary, and not just endorsing Hillary, but talking about the direction we need to go in our country in the future. And the closer we get to this election, the closer we get to these conventions of this election, I hope the clearer it's becoming to everybody, the very stark choice that we're going to be facing in November.
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.